I was listening to the story about, it was a story of a family in Washington, and the little boy called the Bigfoot the Cowboy Man. And he had, apparently it had made an effort to steal this kid. And it hit me. My children were in that playpen behind me with nothing but a mosquito net over them. It could have crept up behind me and taken both of my children, and I wouldn't have known.
Father just got like a Mustang or something from Wyoming, okay? He had it out in the corral because he couldn't put it in the barn in the stalls with the other horses. It would kick and made all the other horses nervous. Had a Seminole Indian working the horse, trying to break it every day. So they had it out in the corral. This skunk ape snuck up behind this horse and grabbed it on its hind quarters. This particular horse kicks out, jumps over the corral, runs into the pasture, to get away. At this point, the rancher's out there just blasted away with the dirty. Skunk ape runs into the swamp.
I went up there one day after that, or 2 days after that. I went up there and sat in the silence up there, and I'm telling you, man, it was free. It was crazy. There was a crazy vibe up there still. I did what I could to kind of get things under control, but I told her, I said, you need to get off this property. I feel like no matter how strong you are, it's almost like standing in the ocean. You can't stand still without moving your feet. You're going to get knocked over eventually, no matter how strong, whatever. You can't withstand a barrage of weird spiritual energy.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Paranormal Odyssey. Thought I'd jump on here this morning and throw another short legend at you guys. Started looking around yesterday at some stuff, some possible topics to get into, and I ran across something that surprisingly I'd never heard of, being so close to this area. Found it very, very interesting. I've never heard anyone talk about it. Maybe there's some out there that are familiar with it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Also, would love any suggestions at all for future topics. You can email me. Put that up real quick. You can get me at Wayne at paranormalworldproductions.com. And just give me your opinion on what you think about doing more of these in the future, and any topics you want to see or hear covered. And yeah, tell me if I suck, if I'm doing a good job. Just reach out, let me know what you think. All right, I am talking about the legend of the Moon-Eyed People. Just the title alone caught my attention and was really, really intriguing to me. So I'm just gonna go ahead and jump into it. Start reading you guys a little bit about them. The Moon-Eyed People are a legendary group of short, bearded, white-skinned people who are said to have lived in Appalachia until the Cherokee expelled them. Stories about them attributed to Cherokee tradition are mentioned by early European settlers in America in a 1797 book. Benjamin Smith Barton explains they are called moon-eyed because they see poorly during the day. Some stories claim they created the area's pre-Columbian ruins and they disappeared from the area. Barton cited as his source a conversation with Colonel Leonard Marbury of 1749 to 1796, an early settler of Georgia. Marbury, a Revolutionary War officer and congressman in the Second Provisional Congress of Georgia, acted as intermediary between Native American Indians in the state of Georgia and the United States government. Published accounts of an ancient moon-eyed people who lived in the southern Appalachian region of the United States before the Cherokee came into the area have appeared in America since the late 18th century. Sources disagree as to the accuracy of the stories, whether or not the stories are an authentic part of Cherokee oral tradition, whether the people existed or were mythical, whether they were indigenous peoples or early European explorers, and whether or not they built certain prehistoric structures found in the region. Different ideas about the people have appeared in letters, newspapers, and books for over 200 years. Stories about the era before widespread European settlement were published by early European settlers in America, who became interested in the native people and old ruins in America. Among the earliest people to mention the legend are Benjamin Smith Barton, who wrote who wrote that he had heard a story from Leonard Marbury about ancient moon-eyed people, and John Seaver, who told an ancient white race, according to a later published sources who mentioned Seaver's letters. Barton Marbury and Seaver, living during the era when the lower Appalachians were still part of the Cherokee Nation before the Trail of Tears. Later human interest articles mention Barton. There are a few published accounts that moon-eyed people during the century following the Cherokee removal. One book by William Mooney appeared in 1902. Human interest stories in the Chattanooga News in 1923 mention the legend of moon-eyed people. The Georgia Parks Division of the Department of Natural Resources has a marker at Fort Mountain that mentions the legends that mentions legends about the wall's origin. Of the moon-eyed people, the plaque says, these people are said to have been unable to see during certain phases of the moon. During one of these phases, the Creek people inhibited the race. Some believe the moon-eyed people built the fortifications on this mountain. Today there are differing publications or opinions about the moon-eyed people as to whether they were real people or prehistoric times or mythical people from folklore. Whether moon-eyed means they had eyes like moons or were called moon-eyed because they could see better at night, whether they are indigenous people or European origin. The moon-eyed people are noted in a 1968 historical marker in Fort Mountain State Park, Chatsworth, Georgia. Stories of the people appear in park guides and news articles of that era, and speculations about the origin of the wall. One early source about the time before the Cherokee removal is an account by early Tennessee Governor John Seaver. Seaver lived at a time when North Georgia and other parts of the Appalachians were still part of the Cherokee Nation between 1800 and 1805. He was involved with treaties that later led to the Cherokee removal. According to a 1969 newspaper article in Forsyth County News, Georgia, Seaver visited Fort Mountain in 1782. The article cites John Seaver from a letter date unspecified as saying that Chief Akatusodo, sorry if I'm butchering that, I'm sure I am, of the Cherokees, then 90 years old, had told Seaver that his own forefathers told of a fort being built by white men from across the Great Water. Chief Okonosta died in 1783, which would have been in the year following Seaver's visit. Benjamin Smith Barton, author of the New Views of the Origin of the Tribes and Nations of America, 1797, describes an ancient people who were moon-eyed. Barton, citing Colonel Leonard Marbury, an intermediary between the government and Cherokee, writes, The Cherokee tell us that when they first arrived in the country which they inhabit, they found it possessed by certain moon-eyed people who could not see in the daytime. These wretches they expelled. A 1923 article in the Chattanooga News mentions a 1797 book by Barton that repeats the Cherokee legend about moon-eyed people. The article says of Barton, He seems to consider them an albino race. In his book, Barton infers that the moon-eyed people were ancestors of albinos encountered by Lionel Wafer, a Welsh explorer of the early 18th century. According to Barton, water lived from a time among the Cuna people of Panama, called moon-eyed, because they could see better at night than day. Two early histories published after Barton's work mention the term moon-eyed people. Both Ezekiel Sanford's History of the United States Before the Revolutionary and B.R. Carroll's Historic Collections of South Carolina cite James Adair, historian, in attributing the term moon-eyed people to Cherokee tradition. Stories about the people appeared in descriptions of historic sites and parks in the 20th century. Another writer, James Mooney, links Barton's moon-eyed people story to several similar accounts. His 1902 book, Myths of the Cherokee, cites an earlier historian, John Hayward. Mooney quotes Hayward's 1823, The Natural and Aboriginal History of Tennessee, as telling of white people who were extrapolated in part driven from Kentucky and probably also from West Tennessee. Mooney attributes this to Indian tradition. According to Mooney, Hayward says that the 17th century, the Cherokee encountered white people on the Little Tennessee River and describes fortifications left by the French that were surrounded by hoes, axes, guns, and other metallic utensils, adding that the Cherokee found no aboriginals when they arrived. Mooney cites two further independent accounts from Cherokee individuals of his time, of people who lived north of the Hiwassee River when the Cherokee arrived there and then went west. One of these describes them as very small people, perfectly white. Revisiting the old stories, authors who have written of moon-eyed people from Cherokee lore have given their opinions on the origin of the legend and have contributed other ideas and explanations to the existing legends of moon-eyed people. Citing John Seaver's story of Okanosta, again, I'm sorry, I'm butchering these words, as it relates to whites having built the ancient structure, Gwen Williams note that this is a beautiful example of the way minds were working in the late 18th century and the power of suggestion which white minds could exercise over red. Also, in some later accounts, the moon-eyed people have become inseparable from a Welsh explorer named Madoc. In 2008, a 2008 article in the Athens Banner Herald, Mystery Surrounds North Georgia Ruins by Walter Putnam, describes the ruins at Fort Mountain. Putnam writes that Cherokee legend attributes the wall to a mysterious band of moon-eyed people led by a Welsh prince named Madoc, who appeared in the area more than 300 years before Columbus sailed to America. A plaque at the wall says matter-of-factly it was built by Madoc. On the other hand, a long opinion piece by Rome News Tribune reporter Stacy McCain, published in the Rome Tribune in 2008, says that it was an early Philadelphia author who first suggested that the moon-eyed people were white. He says that the Cherokee legend before then did not mention color. McCann also points out that the Philadelphia piece published in 1797 was picked up in 1823 by another author who wrote of violent conflict between the Cherokee and some blonde, blue-eyed, fair-skinned inhabitants. Park literature had attributed that legend of Cherokee chiefs McCain writes, apparently Tennessee historian John Hayward qualifies as an ancient tribal chief, since it was his 1823 book that first told of Cherokees slaughtering prehistoric white people. Though Haywood had apparently never heard of Fort Mountain, he says that the plaques date to 1968. In addition to legends of moon-eyed people of the eastern Appalachian region, there are legends of moon-eyed people that relate to other regions or to cultures besides the Cherokee. There is a mention of moon-eyed people from Cherokee Legends of Ohio. Author Barbara Alice Mann, who identifies herself as Ohio Bear Clan Seneca, suggests that a moon-eyed people of Cherokee tradition were Adena culture people from Ohio who merged with the Cherokees around 200 BC. A 1914 book by Charles Loftus Grant Anderson, Old Panama and Castilla del Oro, describes a race of moon-eyed people who were described by Lionel Wafer. All right, well, there you go, guys. Again, lived here my whole life. Only 2 states I've ever lived. Born and raised in Tennessee, lived in North Georgia for about 11 years, and then moved back to Southeast Tennessee. So Tennessee and Georgia is where I've lived. Never heard of the moon-eyed people. If you have, I would love to hear about it. You have any comments, anything to add to the story, I would greatly appreciate it. Want to remind everybody about Paranormal Odyssey podcast released every Wednesday and Sunday. It is now Wednesday. Had an episode come out this morning. Invite you to go check that out. I hope you will. This Friday night, I will be live with Mr. D.A. Roberts discussing Bigfoot and Dogman and some of the books that he's written. Been looking forward to talking to D.A. for a while now and excited to have him on. All right, guys. I don't know if there's anything else to add. Let me throw my email up one more time for you. Wayne at Paranormal World Productions. Again, guys, I want to encourage everyone to just reach out. Let's have a conversation about some of this weird stuff. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, either the live shows or podcast form, I would absolutely love to talk to you about that. Got some great interviews coming up, interviews I've done, got others lined up. Excited about the future for Paranormal World Productions, not only Paranormal Odyssey, but Sasquatch Odyssey. Brian's doing some amazing stuff over there. You guys know that, as well as the True Crime Odyssey. So check out our website if you don't mind. Throw that up. ParanormalWorldProductions.com. All right, guys. I guess I will get out of here. Hope everyone has a happy and safe Wednesday and the rest of your week. I will see you later, y'all. Be good to each other. Be good to yourselves.